Welcome back, friends. Welcome back to the Corbett Report. I'm your host, James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, with another edition of Film, Literature, and the New World Order. And I'm particularly excited to be here doing this podcast with you today for two reasons. One is because not only am I joined by a first-time guest on the Corbett Report, who I'm excited to talk to, but I'm also joined by a number of Corbett Report members who are here live in the chat. Once again, if you want to be involved in the Film, Literature, New World Order book club, then become a Corbett Report member, and you will be able to get a link to the live stream before it happens. So you can join live and leave your comments and questions not in the comment section, but actually live, and we'll respond to them in person. Imagine that. And secondly, I am excited specifically to talk about today's book, which you will know by now is The New Atlantis by Sir Francis Bacon. And I am particularly interested because this is a book that has been on my radar for a very long time. I've known about it and obviously heard about it, but I have not taken the time to read it until I had the opportunity. I had the excuse to read it specifically for this edition of Film, Literature, and the New World Order. And I did so because, well, this was one of the suggestions from this month's guest. Now, who is the guest for this month? Good question. His name is Nicholas Hayes. You will hopefully know him from his Nicholas Hayes Reviews channels, to be found various places on the internet. And hopefully you, at the very least, will remember that he interviewed me about Reportage back last year when that was still a relatively newly released book. If you don't remember that, of course, you can check out that conversation in the archives at CorbettReport.com. But let's bring him on. Nicholas Hayes, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation. Yeah, I'm very excited to have read this book finally and to have the opportunity to talk about it. It's a very interesting book.
Absolutely. And before we get into that, perhaps just to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do and where you do it and how people can follow you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Nicholas Hayes, often shortened to Nick. Typically, I'm called Nicholas when I'm in trouble by the various people in my family. But yeah, it's Nick Hayes usually. But I run Hayes Reviews on YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey. They're channels which I initially started to review and talk about books. I got very interested in books and collecting them and preserving them during lockdowns back in 2020 when I saw channels such as yours disappearing from YouTube and other places. I know you've been reinstated now, so congratulations on that. But I was getting worried about the censorship at the same time as I was tumbling down the rabbit hole and learning about various historical events. Operation Paperclip is a great example. And I thought, there's books written about these things? I got to get me these books. And so I started going through bookshops and building up my collection. And now here I am. And at some point, I decided to start a channel reviewing those books. That became live streams where I read the book on air in full and just sort of react to it and respond to it and comment on it as we go. And there's a good, decent archive now up there of about 12 or 13 books that I've read through in full. And then most recently, branching out to interviewing authors such as yourself. You were very kind enough to be the first guest on my Hayes Interviews series. I think I'm up to about 6 or 7 episodes now, and I've got more authors in the pipeline to come on and talk to about their books. So it's all about books. If anybody wants to read books, hang out with people who talk about books, or get recommendations on what books to buy or read yourself, then that's what I'm trying to help people with.
Awesome. And I am obviously interested in talking about books. I hope people out in the audience are ready for a discussion on this book in particular, The New Atlantis by Sir Francis Bacon. But really, the question I have to start before we even delve into the book itself is, this was one of the books that you had proposed when we first started talking about doing this edition of Film, Literature, New World Order. And this is the one that caught my eye. And I thought, I've always wanted to read that. So let's do this. But why did you suggest this book?
Yeah. So this book was put onto my radar when I was listening to talks by Alan Watt, who ran cuttingthroughthematrix.com, and I think was on a podcast with you in the early days, in the sub 100 episodes. I think you spoke to him. And so he was very good at bringing books to our attention. He talked about Tragedy and Hope. He talked about Foundations, Their Power and Influence, the Renee Wormser book, which I have because I'm currently reading through that one on the channel, actually. That's a good one. And New Atlantis was one that he mentioned, and he talked about the technologies and the sciences described in this book and how remarkable it was, given that this was published in the early 17th century, in the sort of 1600s. And I thought, okay, that's interesting and very curious. And at some point, I should check that out and see what is actually written in there. I have a number of books that were recommended by Alan, and that was just one of those. So I thought, perfect opportunity. Let's see if James has read it or is interested in reading it. And you were, so.
Yes, I am. And like yourself, I'm sure I heard Alan Watt talking about it. I've heard other people mentioning it as a foundational work of the Rosicrucian conspiracy / founding of America. I've heard of this book referenced in a number of ways that are interesting. And I'm not sure that my reading of this book actually I don't know if it conflicted with those ways that I've heard it talked about in the past, but let's just set the table for people and put some context to this. So, of course, Sir Francis Bacon was born in the 1560s, died in 1626, or is that what he wants you to believe? And because there is a theory that he did not die in 1626, that in fact he fled to the continent and lived out the rest of his days there under a pseudonym. Of course, I mean, look up Francis Bacon in conspiracy realist circles, and you will find all sorts of interesting propositions about who this man really was and what he was involved in and what he did, from the founding of the Rosicrucian order itself to being literally the author of all of Shakespeare's plays to everything else that you can imagine. And I have attempted over the past several weeks in preparation for this podcast to immerse myself in the Bacon side of the conspiracy realist circles. And I must admit, I quickly realized this is a subject that you could spend your entire life researching and still probably not know everything there is to know about the era in which Bacon was living and that he was writing about and what he really was and was not involved in, and etc. But I have come to the conclusion that the people who are obsessed with Bacon, either in the positive direction or in the negative direction, as in he's the arch conspirator of the occultists, either way, I think they both generally tend to venerate this man as one of the greatest human beings who ever lived. Even the people who think it was an evil genius certainly still give him credit for being a genius. So at any rate, we come to this book, The New Atlantis, which was not published during his lifetime. It was published the year after his death by his amanuensis, which I actually looked up today. It's one of those words I've seen all my life, and I never looked up the actual definition of it. Oh, yes, he dictated to him, who would copy down what he was saying. Anyway, his amanuensis and executor, or whatever title he had, published the book in 1627. It's believed that this was probably written in 1623 after Bacon fell from political grace after a political scandal. But did he really fall from grace? I think will be the theme of tonight's conversation. What do we really know about Bacon, etc.? Anyway, that's kind of the background of this. Obviously, it comes as part of that genre of fiction, the utopian fiction that people will know, of course, of Sir Thomas More's Utopia, which literally coined the name Utopia. And there are other examples of it, specifically quite a few cropping up in that late 16th century, early 17th century time frame, around the time frame that Bacon was penning his own utopia of sorts, the New Atlantis. So I don't know where you want to start with this, Nick. Wherever you want to start delving into it, let's get into it.
Yeah, I did a similar. I don't think I immersed myself as deeply as you did, but I did look up a podcast that was recommended, and very quickly in that, a couple of episodes in, Francis Bacon is the most intelligent, evil genius mastermind of everything that's ever happened in the world. And I thought, wow, that's quite a legacy, quite a persona, quite a character, you might say, that's been built up around him. So I hadn't heard about a lot of these things he was connected to, such as his authorship of the Shakespeare plays, such as his involvement in or at least his proximity to the establishment of the transatlantic slave trade, which happened sort of underneath Queen Elizabeth, and he was very high up in the UK sort of legal system while this was ongoing, which started before his lifetime and peaked after his lifetime. But apparently, he had quite a pivotal role in seeing that whole thing go through. So yeah, I was very new to the man himself, and also quite new to utopian fiction. I've read a lot more dystopia than I have utopia, and I know things such as Aldous Huxley's Island. That's one I want to read at some point. Thomas More's Utopia you mentioned, and it's not utopian, but another book I heard mentioned in relation to this one was Machiavelli's The Prince, and that this one is a sort of commentary that builds on or responds to both Machiavelli's work and Thomas More's work. And so I've read it through twice, and one of those had that experience of the second reading. I thought I could probably read this 50 times and still pick up new things and glean new things and have new ideas sparked, which is amazing. For in my copy, it's a 40-page book. Like, it's all it is. It's really short. It's not. And I was thinking that maybe we could start here. I'm not even sure what genre it is. I'm not even sure it is a utopia. I'm not. It's not really a narrative. Is it more of an expose, or in the context of sort of New World Order and phrases that we're familiar with, is it a revelation of the method, or is it or perhaps it's a bit of predictive programming? So what were your thoughts about the genre and where it fell, and how would you describe its sort of function?
That is an excellent question, and you're right. I'm not sure this is a utopia, at least not in the straightforward sense, but it certainly is describing a society that I think Bacon wants us to look upon favorably, as in, oh, they're doing something right. And so for people who haven't read it yet, please stop this podcast and just read it. It's 40 pages, as he said. You can read it comfortably in an afternoon, even if you're a slow reader. I've read it 3 times in preparation for this podcast, and you're exactly right. I got probably even more out of the third reading than I did out of the first 2. So there are some interesting details in here. But let's situate this in the context of the title, New Atlantis. Why New Atlantis? Well, because, of course, specifically, this does make mention of the Atlantis myth. Question mark. And about, as specifically, he frames it as, well, Atlantis was America. But then there was a flood of sorts that wasn't due to an earthquake, despite what you guys in Europe have heard from that Plato character of yours. No, there was a flood of sorts, and that basically wiped out the population so it was just a few scragglers who lived in the woods, and then they came down to repopulate America, the Americas, once the flood receded. And that's why you've encountered these seemingly primitive people living on the American continent. But actually, it used to be a great civilization. But that isn't even, of course, what this is really about. No, it's really more about Ben Salem, which is this island somewhere off the coast of Peru, that apparently is completely unknown to the rest of the world, but knows everything about the rest of the world because it has been studying it. And I would say, in fact, I am inclined to say that I don't know if this is a genre per se, but I would say that what he is describing is less a utopia and more of a technocracy. I would venture to say that Ben Salem is the technocratic vision for a future society. And I say that advisedly, specifically because, of course, this is essentially a narrative that's divided into 3 parts. There are 3 main conversations that guide this narrative. The first is the master of the stranger's house, or whatever that's called, the person who's the governor of the stranger's house, who is obviously greeting the strangers who have come to the island. Then there's the conversation with the Jew, who I do not remember, Joabin. And thirdly, there is the conversation with the master of Salomon's house. And I think clearly that's I don't know. I would say that's probably the part that captures our attention the most and probably gets the most attention. Although there are some interesting parts in all 3 of those narratives. But I would say once we get to the Salomon's house part and the description of the scientific contraptions and experiments that this College of the 6 Days work is working on, you start to see what this society is really about and how it's really ordered. And in fact, for me, perhaps the most interesting part of all of this comes in a little admission that the master of Solomon's House makes, that the people of Solomon's House take all an oath of secrecy for the concealing of those experiments, those findings, which we think fit to keep secret, though some of those we do reveal sometimes to the state and some not. As in, who really rules this island? Who is the real ruling authority of this island? It's obviously these people working at Solomon's House who get to decide. They take their oath of secrecy. So of course there's a secret society that is really finding the roots and learning about all of this deep knowledge, and they will choose what to divvy out to the state as they see fit. I mean, I think that paints a very interesting picture of the type of society that Bacon wanted to see come about, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly. And there's really, it's acknowledged as well, because when this father, they call him the father, he's kind of a priestly class, let's say, from Solomon's House returns, he's paraded through the streets with all the officials and the politicians and all the governors and etc. behind. So it's not that this group are ruling from secrecy, from the shadows, literally from caves, they tell us. But it's also openly acknowledged that, okay, this is the best of the best. This is who runs the show. This is who gets the most, the fanciest outfits and the big parades that everybody turns up in their windows and on the streets to welcome back. So it's kind of openly acknowledged that this is where the power lies. And yeah, that section was where I really sat up and thought, wow, I couldn't believe some of the things I was reading, because in that third section, he starts to detail the technologies that they have. And I mean, if you like your conspiracies, this book has everything. It's got like genetic modification, weather modification. It's got interbreeding, chimeric animals. It's got Project Bluebeam like illusions of using the manipulation of light to make objects appear that aren't there or seem closer or further than they actually are. It's quite astonishing, and the more I reflected on these, the powers that this small group has, and it's a very small group because he does number them later towards the end of that conversation. I started to reflect on the story very differently, because I thought maybe this whole situation has been manufactured and manipulated by this small group. To what end, I'm not sure exactly, but they do talk about how. So to go back to sort of the setup, the narrator, he's on a ship, and they set sail from Peru, and they get caught up in all these winds, and they run out of food, and they think, that's it, we're done for, we're dead, game over, let's start praying. And then they end up in Ben Salem, and they are received, and they're given help and food, and they're looked after, and they start to gradually be brought into these circles, the deeper and deeper circles of this society and how it works, and with more about it being revealed with each layer that they get further in. But then you find out that these winds that brought them there, well, this group of people, they can manufacture wind. They've got these gigantic rooms where they simulate meteors and hailstorms and winds and lightning. So maybe they manufactured the winds that brought them there, right? So this is where I started going. I'm thinking, well, maybe they manufactured the whole thing. And this even ties into the story that they learn from the governor, who's the first person that reveals something about this place. And he talks about this conversion experience, because ostensibly on the face of it, this community, this city is a Christian city. And that's what gives the sailors, the crew, hope, because they're Christians, and they think, okay, we might be all right here, because they see a cross on the parchment that is given to them. And then we learn about the story about how they had this miraculous experience and what happened. And I thought, maybe that was a Project Bluebeam type illusion as well, to get the whole people in this area sort of under the spell, So that's where I started going when I was reflecting on these technologies they have, and starting to see maybe they've been using them from the very beginning of this story.
That's a fascinating and very good point. If they have these technologies, then absolutely all of this could be part of their doing, or there could be maybe they have learned these techniques from people before them who, as you say, may have whatever blue beamed the population into becoming Christian. Why not? But actually, my mind went in a different direction with this, because at the same time, as I say, I'm reading and rereading this particular work, as I am also steeping myself in all of this Bacon lore and the secret societies and things. And it gets to the point where he's the secret son of Mary, Queen of Scots. No, he's the secret son of Elizabeth I. No, he's actually, there's a million different theories about all these different things. And, if you read the 9th line on this particular printing of this verse that was in one of the editions of such and such, you will, and if you read the first letter of each one, it will be an anagram of F.R. Bacon, which of course is Francis Bacon, which proves that he is the author of Shakespeare. It's all of this like 17 layers of hidden secrecy, mystery, and, you have to use the decoder ring in the right way, which, to be fair, there is some aspect to that, because for people who don't know, Francis Bacon literally did come up with something that's called the bilateral cipher, which is this elaborate way of encoding information secretly within other works that, again, this is mainstream stuff. You don't even have to go to conspiracy circles for this. And the Baconian cipher, for people who want to look it up, it works where if you're writing a sentence, but you're writing it in 2 different typefaces, each letter can be in either one of 2 typefaces, and then depending if you're using typeface A or typeface B, you convert those letters into A's and B's. So it might be A, B, B, A, B, B, A, B, B, B. And then you take those groupings into groups of 5s, and each group of 5 corresponds to a different letter. So A, B, A might be the letter C or something like that. And so that way you can, and so this is a literal cipher, just one of the things that we know that Bacon actually had and did and worked with. He worked at some point for Walsingham, who was Queen Elizabeth's spy master. So, and he had some relation to the John Dee who had come before him, 007, all of that. So, he's definitely in the secret society. There are these smoke and mirrors. But as I'm reading the people who are, telling me that, oh no, the cipher shows that he's actually the son of this person, or he's actually this. It got to the point where I started to disbelieve in sort of all of it. I think it's all hocus pocus and mystery, and in the way that secret societies, I think, often, to my mind, the way they function is we have all these special secret powers and the hidden teachings of the ages, and we know everything and we can do anything. But I think it's all smoke and mirrors just to bamboozle people and make them feel like that. And that was the way I started reading the Master of Salomon's House, especially when he started. Just the way that some of the braggartism came across when he's describing some of the things, where he was talking about, we make diverse imitations of taste likewise, so that they will deceive any man's taste. And in this house we contain also a comforture house, where we make all sweetmeats dry and moist, and diverse pleasant wines, milks, broths, and salads in far greater variety than you have. And it's just all like over and over, for paragraph after paragraph after paragraph, talking about all these crazy, amazing, wonderful things that we can do, and we control winds and sounds and light and taste and energy and everything. And meanwhile, he's not demonstrating any of this. He's just telling him, we can do all this incredible stuff. Bow down, kiss my robe, you peon. You can't even imagine the incredible things that we can do behind the scenes, but I'm not going to show you. And that's the way I started to interpret it. Like, maybe it's all just totally made up. Maybe there is absolutely nothing going on at Salomon's house.
Maybe it's all just bluff and bluster, yeah. But he does say, we have all these houses of deceits of the senses, but we don't use them because we're very good people, and we were always honest about the true mechanisms of the things that we're using. Yeah. Meanwhile, he arrives into town on this in this parade with sapphires and diamonds and gold on his carriage, and he's got the finest clothes and an army of attendants following him with silken slippers and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, so that's an interesting way of looking at it. Absolutely, I was thinking along the lines of what Alan Watt mentions this book in the context of knowledge of certain sciences is much older than we are led to believe, and his idea was that what we are given and what we are shown and allowed to have and be aware of is actually not cutting edge stuff. There's some research departments somewhere, black budget funding, where they've got things that are much further down the line of where we're at here. And his suggestion was, this book sort of suggests that these sciences are very, very old, and so that's kind of the angle I was coming from. But the idea that it's all just a real
okay, but yeah, let's go down that path a little, because when you read the mainstream commentaries about this book, they'll tell you that this is often seen as the genesis of the Royal Society and or the beginnings of sort of the modern research university and the way that work is pursued in natural sciences and that sort of thing. But actually, yeah, to my mind, this is more like the model for what we have now when it comes to, say, the military industrial complex and the things that are going on, DARPA and Area 51 or whatever, whatever stuff they're working on. Can we doubt that there is crazy stuff that is happening in these far off locations that we don't get access to because it's only for, but don't worry, guys, these are good guys that would never use these things for bad purposes. But I think that's kind of that. If there's a model for the modern secrecy state that has existed at least since the National Security Act of 1947, if there is a model for that, maybe it's to be found in these pages.
Yeah, it's almost like the we need to study bacterial and viral pathogens that could wipe out whole nations of people, just in case, and we need to make them to understand them, just in case our enemies use them on us. And that's why we need to develop these technologies, right? It's for protection and safety, and because we care about you so much, and we just want to make sure nobody else can bomb you or kill you or wipe you out, right? So it's our ever-loving overlords creaming off all this public money, funding it into these black budgets, these laboratories and these research departments and foundations as well, which I wanted to mention. I'll just come back to in a minute, but this unlimited funding of things that we never get to use or see or benefit from, but we're told that we do benefit from it. But the reason I wanted to mention the word foundation is in relation to this this college, the House of Solomon. There's three different words I think used to describe. One of them is that it's the eye of Ben Salem. Another one is that it's the lantern of Ben Salem. And then that it's the foundation of Ben Salem. And the word foundation is mentioned three times, twice by the governor and once by the father, the I don't know what is he? Father of Solomon's house. He's called a father. He's a priest. I'm not sure. But this word foundation, I thought it had Masonic overtones, sort of secret societies, and linking into the book I mentioned, the Wormser book on foundations, their power and influence. Still to this day, we are suffering under the yoke of these unaccountable, crazily well-funded societal sort of manipulation think tank groups, Rockefeller, Bill and Melinda Gates, etc., and so on. And apparently there's a Francis Bacon Foundation out there as well. Somebody was telling me in my chat.
Yes.
And they're putting some narrative out about his parentage and who he is.
Right. No, yes, I've definitely come across the Francis Bacon Society, I think they're calling themselves. But anyway, yeah, there's but yes, okay, yeah. Yes, if we're going to look at Masonic imagery or illusions here, surely we should look to Solomon's house itself. And the fact that presumably this is, as they say, it may be, Solomona, who was the king from long ago that they're venerating. But no, it seems to be named after Solomon, as in Solomon's temple. Obviously, son of King David from the Old Testament, but Solomon's temple, where have I heard about that before? Oh, right. Who was the architect of Solomon's temple? It was Hiram Abiff. And in the third degree of Freemasonry, you get to hear the story about Hiram Abiff and how he was set upon by ruffians near the completion of Solomon's temple and killed. And this is a foundational, to use that word, part of the Freemasonic lore, myth, at least in the Anglo version of Freemasonry. And so what do we have here? We have Solomon's house, as in like the temple, right? And who has constructed it, and what are they trying to do? I guess one of the questions that's intriguing to me is, to what extent is this meant to be allegorical about our metaphysical journey? That Atlantis is a state of consciousness and all of that. And to what extent is this actual, real nuts and bolts, boots on the ground? We need to start this type of, actual divvying up of work in the natural sciences.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that. Did you think about that beforehand?
I still wonder about this because, again, through my various, explorations of the people who are elaborating on Bacon and his life, for example, just in this past weekend's subscriber newsletter, I put in a link to recommended viewing or recommended listening of a lecture that Manly P. Hall gave about the new Atlantis back in the 1960s. And in that, he elaborates in great degree of detail about the context of this and its sort of meaning in the secret societies and its illusions in that way. But the tendency, I think, is to take it in that sort of, it's all intellectual. This is just an allegory, a metaphor. It's not meant to be literal. And I'm not so sure about that. I think Bacon really was, from everything that I have found about him, quite a practical person who actually wanted to see this really come into reality in some way or other. Whether or not he could really envision, the various scientific advances that he claimed Solomon's house, was capable of. At any rate, the Baconian method of scientific, induction, essentially inductive reasoning, which is still to this day seen as part of the foundation of the scientific revolution of the 16th, 17th century, is clearly elaborated on in this work. And to that extent, I think Bacon wasn't trying to talk about some sort of, vague allegory or some secret society teaching about the real history of Atlantis. I think he was trying to point the way towards what he wanted to see come into the world.
Because it's often described as a scientific utopia, isn't it? But the whole story revolves around Christianity. I mean, they had an ark which arrived from St. Bartholomew, which the priest from Solomon's house verified, and then that converted them and gave them this little land of peace and prosperity that would be protected by God. And so I didn't see it as a scientific utopia unless you see the religion and the practice of rolling out a religion or creating a religion or putting it in, upon a group of people as a control mechanism, unless you see that as a science, if that makes sense. Like there's a stepwise process to it. You're going to need some prophets, and you're going to need some, what do you call them? Prophecies that are fulfilled, and all these other kind of things. Because there's other books out there such as the Christianity Before Christ, the world's 16 crucified saviors, which just talks about much older religions and some of the parallels between the foundational stories of Jesus, resurrection, and being the Son of God, and these other gods that came before him were crucified, suggesting that there's kind of a formula that might be rolled out and practiced and reiterated and refined and changed going over time. That might be very heretical, and I apologize if I upset people in the audience. I'm just asking questions and playing with ideas. But could that also be a layer to this as well, in that the whole control system features scientific knowledge and experimentation done in the caves, also a religion that everyone signed up to and agrees is good and they profess and they take part in. We also know there's a merchant system, because the second person we talk to is Jobin. He's the Jew who the narrator assures us is circumcised, which gave me a chuckle. It was like, he's a Jew and circumcised. I'm like, oh, did you check?
But he's a good Jew.
Yeah, he's a good Jew.
He's
exactly.
very careful to say in a
Critically.
few different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the first, so you kind of you go from the governor to the merchant, Jaobin, to the priest. So it's got politics, a political system. It's got the merchant, which presumably has the banking system as well, because you can't really do the trade without the money. And then it's got the secret society, scientific control, and experimentation and practice at the very core of it. So it's kind of all there. I think it's more like a blueprint. I don't know, like you say, I think this is how it could work. But also I think part of it is telling us how maybe it does work. I think there's a little bit of revelation in there. And
Go ahead.
I was just going to add as well, to sort of circle back to the Freemasonic conversation. Another way I looked at it was sort of like an initiation, because these people arrive and firstly, they're standing there waving them off saying, no, you can't land. Not angrily, not aggressively. They're not there with spears like, they just say, no, don't land. And just as a side note, that confused me because he uses the word diverse all the way through this book, but he doesn't put an E on the end of it. So initially I thought it was divers of the people.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like, the divers of the people.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until halfway through, I'm like, oh, he's saying diverse. Right. Okay. So they get waved off, and then gradually they get approached and they say, okay, well, you can land, but you got to be gone very soon. And then the governor approaches and says, well, are you Christian? And they say, yeah. And he's like, well, have you killed anyone in the last 40 days? And they're like, nope. So, okay, you can stay a bit longer. And every time they meet someone, a little bit is revealed, and then some messenger shows up and says, hey, you got to get out of here. Yeah. And the governor is called away, or the Jew is called away. And I'm almost like, each stage they're being vetted and checked. Yeah. And it's like, oh, the first question they asked was about, why are we Christian? Oh, okay, that's good. We can work with that. Whereas if the first question they asked were like, you heathens, you should believe in Allah or something, right, they might have got turned away back there and not brought into the deeper layers. So I thought there was also a kind of a initiation aspect to this as well. And something we haven't mentioned yet, just as a final point. Sorry, I know it's a long, but this isn't finished, is it? Because the end of my copy says, a really interesting, the rest was not perfected. That's the last sentence. Is that and so we're left to think, where would this have gone? What was planned to be in it after what we got? Because we got a lot,
Yes, this is for anyone out there who was unaware, this is a fragment. As I say, it was published after his death. ? So yes, this was not a completed work. So we don't know what would have happened after this. But yes, very insightful. Yes, clearly this is sort of an initiation sort of process that they're going through, which doesn't even have to be sort of in the secret society sort of way. I mean, this is how you would welcome strangers into your land if you were a particularly xenophobic land. You carefully, and after studying them and making sure and testing them out and seeing what they are. But it does really raise the question towards the end of this fragment, where after telling him in great detail about all of these different things that Solomon's house is doing, then the father stands up and blesses him and says, God bless thee, my son, and God bless this relation which I have made. I give thee leave to publish it for the good of other nations, for we here are in God's bosom, a land unknown. So yeah, why? What was the point of this? Why? And yes, actually when he says that, God bless this relation which I have made. Actually, I think that lends credence to your idea. What if they had started this with their, wind making machine in the first place or whatever? What if this had all been their plot to get these people here to give them leave to publish it for the good of other nations? For we here, I mean, again, maybe this is just a writer who's writing a fanciful story who needs some sort of like, well, why are they telling us this? Oh, it's to give us this, the blessings of their land. But really, what is the point? What is Benzalem's long-term goal here? Why do they have the secrecy? And then why are they giving leave to publish this far and wide? I mean, I don't think that's answerable, but it's a question.
Yes, absolutely. And part of it, I suppose we get a clue in the governor's history, because that's the first conversation. The governor gives us his history and he says, 1.5 millennia ago, people were traveling all over the world, and people were a lot more mobile. And there were these great seafaring civilizations such as Egypt and China. He also mentions Palestine and East Tartaria or
Yes.
Tartary. Yeah. So interesting to see those two places in there. Some people accusing both of those of not existing or being real places. And he talks about this ancient seafaring global mixing of peoples, but all that was lost and forgotten, except us. We maintained it. We kept hold of it. We still have our ships and our abilities to do that. So that is the question, isn't it? It's like, why now? What is the purpose now? It's like they've been hiding, they've been cut off, they're perfectly happy. Is it time to reintroduce themselves? Is it time for them to come out and to reestablish or give something back? I mean, this links to cataclysmic narratives, right? Of peoples were wiped out, and then some people came down from the mountains with all this technology and knowledge and spread it out. And this is found in, like, I know Graham Hancock does this kind of work, doesn't he? And South America has these kind of stories. So,
which lines up with the Atlantis myth, story, whatever that is. If the idea, if there was this ancient cataclysm that did cause the flood and wipe out all sorts of culture, and then the sea peoples emerge out of nowhere to give technology to the peoples. Yes, it does sort of line up with that. And it does seem to be at least a recurring enough story throughout the ages. And that it seems to have been embedded in the secret societies, Rosicrucians and others, ? I guess. All right. So I guess, I mean, why now? But that's kind of the question about the secret societies and what they're operating and what they're trying to do anyway. The question of the revelation of the method in the first place. Why open the kimono at all? Why keep things secret, and why slowly reveal them to the public? Are they trying to lead people into a certain trap because of, certain information that they'll give out at certain times? But again, that's just this sort of speculation that we're left with at the end. I'm not sure we can necessarily know from the outside perspective, but that's the point, isn't it? That's the point of these secret societies that get to decide what information to dole out at what times.
To the state, as well. I noticed that, and I thought that was a really important point that he was like, we decide what we give the state over there. And another interesting part was how you mentioned this is how a xenophobic culture would welcome strangers and new people. When we hear about this king, this Solomon is the king called, he instituted this rule whereby none of the peoples of Ben Salem were to go out abroad anymore, apart from the brethren of the Solomon's house. But for anyone who arrived, instead of like killing them or murdering them or causing them to flee, the idea was, let's welcome them in, let's give them a nice life that the state pays for, and in that way, rather than risk them leaving and telling people about what's going on here, we can just like let them stay. And there's a funny part in the book where the crew of the ship, they become aware that this is the case, and they all start like wanting to run off to go and talk to the governor about like, what are the conditions that I can stay? I want to stay here forever. And the narrator, who's he's not the captain, I don't think, but he's like a higher ranking or well-respected member of the ship. He says, after some effort, we got them all to stay where they are and just hang fire a little bit to learn a bit more about it. So that was quite interesting as well. This idea of a state which pays for and allows non-native people to come in and live there and have a good life, which again mirrors what we see in the modern world, what happens in various places where there's a lot of immigration and there's a lot of people coming in and they're getting put up in and they're getting support from a system that they've never been part of or paid into or anything like that before, right? So I thought that was quite curious as well. That
it is actually. I mean, it's certainly not a concept that I think would have been common at the time. Like I'm assuming it's original to this work, but very specifically, doesn't he tell them that the reason that they have? I mean, we have enough to take care of all your stay here because no one's been here.
No one's been here. Yeah.
Yeah, so
37 years, I think it was.
Something like that, yeah.
And that's another thing, just as a very quick, final point, before we get to the comments and everything, there's so many numbers. And when you mentioned Bacon's bilateral cipher, I bet if somebody had the numerology background or was interested in it, you could spend a lot of time in here on the distances, the numbers, the days that pass.
Yep.
One example is he talks about they've got towers on hills that go 3 miles into the sky, and they've got caverns underground that go 3 miles underground. And that's your sort of hermetic as above, so below. So there's all sorts of occult symbolism in here encoded in. The numbers of brethren in the House of Solomon is 12 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3, ending up with a total of 36, which is a highly occult number as well, being 3 sixes, 666, but also every number between 1 and 36 when added up equals 666. Right. So whenever I see that number, it stands out to me just because I happen to know that little tidbit. So for anybody who's interested in that sort of stuff too, I bet you could have a big feast going through this book and playing with some of those aspects.
That was another thing that I saw a lot in the in my dive into Bacon, and it was like, and the number 278, of course, in Bacon cipher means bacon or something. It's like,
obviously, yeah.
So of course, since this has a 278, then it's Bacon. So now we know Shakespeare is actually Francis. Anyway,
one of my favorite bits of evidence for that was that it's Francis Bacon, and the play's called Hamlet. I'm like, oh, that's a bit tenuous.
Case closed. How could anyone dispute? Anyway, to be fair, I am certainly not against the idea that Bacon was Shakespeare. I certainly don't believe that William Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare. I don't believe that. But I'm not convinced it was Bacon. At any rate, Bacon might have been part of the group that probably was writing Shakespeare's plays. Anyway, we have, as I think everyone does, and I think logically so, gravitated towards the Solomon's House side of this. How about Jeroboam's story and the focus on the feast of the family? That seems it seems like a large enough section of this narrative that it should be important, but I don't know what really to make of that.
Yeah, that was interesting, wasn't it? This whole feast of the family is described in minute detail, and some really interesting things stood out. The idea is that if a man lives long enough and is, what would you say, is, what's the word that I'm looking for here? Productive enough to have 30 offspring. I don't know if it's 30 children, but it's like 30 members in his family of the generations. Then he has this feast of the father, and all these people come together and they celebrate him and they settle their family disputes. Interestingly, if his mother's still alive, she gets put in a box where she can't be seen behind him. Did you notice that?
I didn't.
It's like, we put her in an attic and where she can't be seen, which was quite strange. And the eldest son becomes known as the son of the vine. And then has to
when he
wear
takes the grapes, which are in a bunch of exactly the number of progeny and all of this. Yeah, it's highly
and they're painted differently depending on the number. If there's more girls, it's a moon, and then if there's more boys, it's a sun. And that people could spend a lot of time on that, definitely. But I think I took it as to mean like
described in such minute detail that there must be something really important here. But I just kind of I failed to grasp what its occult significance is.
And well, I took it. I was thinking of it in terms of the importance of bloodlines and the importance of stock. Because we often hear in our sort of circles of, bloodlines of the Illuminati, Fritz Springmeier, and then, but you also get really good research like the Sheep Farm. I don't know if you're aware, it's a UK podcast, and they do these long deep dives into genealogy of Huxley family and various other families. They find amazing links between the most unlikeliest of places. You've got Dave McGowan's work, where he found a lot of these 60s rock icons came from military families, for example. And so there's something there about genealogy, lineage, bloodlines. It seems to be very important. So that's kind of what I thought was significant here. And the man who gets to this point where he can have this feast, when it gets to the actual eating part, because there's this whole ceremony, he mentioned that man will sit on his own, and no one is allowed to sit with him except for if he has offspring who are in
Solomon's house.
The Solomon's house. Yeah, they're the only ones who can sit with him. So that was quite interesting.
Yeah.
But Joabin as well, very curious, and this whole character and this story about the good Jew who they haven't quite converted to Christianity, but they say there's some good stuff about Jesus and he was an all right fellow.
They would say he's
and
the
they do
greatest of
appreciate
all men and things like this.
Yeah. And they're very unlike the other Jews everywhere else who Bacon doesn't have very nice things to say about.
Yeah.
But I'm sure we've all heard plenty of that when we're in the conspiracy circles.
Exactly. All right. All right. Well, there's a lot to discuss here, as I'm sure everyone can tell. So let's start opening it up to questions and comments from the Corbett Report members that are out there listening to this. So if you have them, start typing them furiously into the comments right now. And while people are doing that, Nick, again, remind people how best they can find your work.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's Hayes Reviews. That's Heys. Reviews as in book reviews. Hayes Reviews on YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey. And I'm on a bit of a hiatus at the minute because I became a father a year ago, and that's just rearranging my whole life in ways that I never anticipated. But I am still plugging on with author interviews. And I have a couple of resources out there as well. One is a sort of a mini course email series about all different quotes, starting with H.G. Wells, The Open Conspiracy, right up to David Rockefeller's memoirs and the continuity there. And I called it Continuity of Control. You can get that at continuityofcontrol.com. It's just a mini course delivered to your inbox. It's free. And then I also created the Ultimate Reading List, which is just an index, a list of all the books in my library for anyone out there who wants to know what books do I think are worth getting hold of, keeping, preserving as we head into this AI-mediated landscape of information where memory holding and altering and changing and amending things is even faster and more efficient than it's ever been before. Gone are the days of Winston sitting there with his Tipex, erasing the names from now it's all automated and algorithmically driven. But ultimatereadinglist.com, you can get a free PDF download of all the books I have. If you want some inspiration on what books you'd like to read or get hold of yourself, create that resource, and that's also free. So yeah, that's my stuff. That's where I am.
Because one thing I've had over and 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 over throughout the years is people always writing me, what books do you recommend? At this point, I do book related podcasts every 2 or 3 a week for however many years. I'm like, I don't know, there's thousands.
Yeah. All right, I like the question. My favorite question is, what's the one book I should read?
Yeah, right, exactly. All right, so let's get to some of the questions and comments here. Trace, the last name, writes, I would like more historical knowledge to be able to better sort fact from fiction. What of the story is 1, common to that time, 2, secret knowledge at that time, 3, map outline for future, 4, other. Good question. I'm not sure that that's something we can definitively state, but do you want to have a stab at that, Nick?
Yeah, I couldn't tell you with 100% certainty without spending a lot more time researching the era, the time, the man, his other writings. I know there's a podcast out there. It's called The Secret Life is Best. And that is entirely focused on Bacon and the Shakespeare link. The Hidden Life is Best. Or The Secret Life is Best, maybe? That's apparently something Bacon said, meaning like...
right now.
Worth checking.
Yes, I know the podcast you're referring to, yes.
Yeah. Right. So that gives you a lot of context, historical context. I think there you go. Trace last name, you're already aware of it.
Yeah.
But I would love to be able to say definitively, but I don't know. I was shocked to read about weather modification, about flying. He talks about they have flying. He talks about growing plants,
ships.
Submersibles, growing plants without seeds, and making animals more fertile or less fertile, bigger or smaller. Right?
Exactly.
This is all in there. That's
barren
amazing to me.
Not generative. Yeah, which is one part I highlighted. Yeah, I highlighted a lot of those specific things because, again, it certainly does sound... It sounds like some of the technologies that we have these days, doesn't it? Grafting and inoculating as well wild trees as fruit trees, which produce many effects, and we make by art in the same orchards, gardens, trees and flowers to come earlier or later than their seasons, and to come up and bear more speedily than by their natural course. by art greater much than their nature, and their fruits sweeter, of differing taste, etc., etc. Yeah, there's a lot of very specific things that surely those weren't actual things that they were doing, or at least was not known at the time, not even barely conceivable, and yet there they are. So, but as to the, any of the other aspects of the story, again, I think it does. I would say it fits into sort of that broad tradition of Sir Thomas More's Utopia. There was one called The City of the Sun, which came out just a couple of decades, I believe, before this one. There were some others that were mentioned again by Manly P. Hall in his lecture about this as being part of the sort of the secret society tradition of this type of narrative of the utopia place that you'll discover somewhere when you get shipwrecked. So anyway, sorry not to be of greater utility there, Trace, but I think that's a very big question to ask. All right, if there are no other questions, comments. Okay, yeah. We definitely have some people pointing out, yes, it is The Hidden Life is Best by Robert Frederick. And people can follow his work for much more on Bacon in particular. All right, I think we will wrap this conversation up here. Nick, again, thank you for giving me the excuse to actually read this. There's a lot in this deceptively short little book, and it does make me want to get further down the Bacon rabbit hole, but not that far. Because as I say, the further down you go, just the more you realize, that people lose their entire lives down this rabbit hole.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It's been a good discussion. There's, like you said, there's so much in here. I hope people, if they haven't read it, naughty, you're supposed to read the book before class, but do go ahead and read it. There's more in there, plenty of things we haven't touched on in this conversation. I'm sure there's definitely things in there that I missed. And as you said, the third reading was even better. So it's one of those that gets better, and it's easy. It's 40 pages, come on. Some of the books we have, it's not a Tragedy in Hope 1,300 page type of thing, right? It's 40 pages. You got no excuse but to pick it up. And it's an easy read, and it's a really welcome departure from the AI slop that we're inundated with nowadays, where everything reads and sounds the same all the time. He's got full, long, complex sentences and descriptions, and it is good for your vocabulary. I learned a load of new words when I was reading this. I had to look them up, and just for your ability to speak better and more complicated ways that aren't sort of simple and soundbitey and sort of sitcom-y. So, it's good to pick up a book and
learn how
from time to time.
Spell diverse without the E.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Excellent. Well, again, thank you for this assignment, and thank you to everyone who participated in it. I think this was a valuable one. And, if this was a relatively easy reading assignment that could, honestly, you could get through it in a couple of hours, well, next month's is not the same. Umberto Eco, Foucault's Pendulum, and it's going to take you a little while to read through this one. So get started now. Next month, we will be talking about Foucault's Pendulum by Umberto Eco. I'm very much looking forward to that one, but it's going to be a big undertaking to read that. So I'm looking very much forward to talking about that next month. We'll leave things there for today. Thank you again for your time and attention, and as always, thank you for supporting this work. If you want to be part of the audience watching this live, become a Corbett Report member. I appreciate the support. Talk to you next time. The Corbett Report is 100% listener supported. Join the Corbett Report community to become a member, and log into CorbettReport.com to read the subscriber newsletter, featuring my weekly editorial, recommended reading and viewing, discounts on Corbett Report merchandise, and, once a month, a subscriber-exclusive video. Sign up today at CorbettReport.com/members and help support this independent media.